West Pine Productions presents the New Way podcast. The New Way contains adult content and is recorded in advance. The following episode was originally recorded on April 6th, 2021. Listener discretion is advised.
So you were in Vietnam, if I'm not mistaken?
Yeah?
Were you in the shit?
Yeah, I was in the shit.
Last night, Darth Vader came down from planet Vulcan and told me that if I didn't take Lorraine out, that he'd melt my brain.
Here's how you get him. He pulls a knife, you pull a gun. He sends one of yours to the hospital, you send one of his to the morgue.
We came, we saw, we kicked its ass.
Everybody wants to be naked and famous. Everybody wants to be just like me, I'm naked.
Will you help teach me about this? What is it? A new way?
Hello and welcome once again to the New Way podcast, where we break down pop culture so you don't have to. I'm your host, Matt Schenk, joined by my co-host, Mr. Benjamin Scott Wilson.
Hello, I'm here.
You're here. That's all we can expect any week on the podcast is just showing up. That's half the battle.
Yeah. Right here. Present.
It's just another humdrum episode from the New Way. Now we've got lots of good stuff for you in store for this episode, and of course, you can always be playing the New Way drinking game alongside as a companion piece to our podcast. So not a lot I wanted to talk about ahead of time. I figured we both watched this recently, and unsure when this airs, but we were just talking about it right now. But Ben, what were your thoughts? I know you watched what is right now the biggest release of the last year, theatrical and otherwise, Kong versus Godzilla. What are your thoughts on this cinematic masterpiece?
I'm glad you had to qualify that was out of the bedroom. Biggest release in the past year. I actually quite enjoyed it because I think that they realized big monster punch big monster equals fun. And they were just like, we're going to, there are subplots and there are other characters, but they kind of did the minimum amount of that in order to get to big monster, punch big monster. And it was fun. So I enjoyed watching Kong get his ass beat continuously by Godzilla.
I was kind of bummed with how much Kong was just getting his shit handed to him, and I'm a Kong guy, right? Godzilla is, I don't know, I've never really gotten the whole Godzilla allure. I'll take a Mothra over a Godzilla. I'll take a Kong over a Godzilla is just sort of, I don't know. Something about Godzilla doesn't matter to me. So I'm rooting for Kong, and man, does he just get the fuck beat out of him like multiple, even his like pseudo victory moments, he's just getting fucked up bad. And it started to hurt me. I started to feel he's just, every time it's just him getting up like, I'm too old for this shit. Like, oh God.
Let's say you texted us and you said that he's like the Danny Glover in this.
Yeah, if Kong
Lethal Weapon series.
Kong had a voice in this movie, it would be Nick Nolte now, and it would the whole movie would just be like, goddamn Godzilla. It would be
Nick Nolte in North Dallas 40.
Yes, yeah. I mean, Nick Nolte's been playing 100 since he was 20. So you can never go wrong. But yeah, I will give it credit. It is what it aims to be, which is a ridiculous, over the top, silly movie. It doesn't take itself super serious, and it's fun. I guess with the monster movies, it's always sort of law of diminishing returns for me. Of like after the first fight, I'm like, okay. And then we got more fights. I'm like, okay, and this time they're fighting and they're going to destroy some cities. And I mean, they did a good job of at least making them like separate areas and locations that they're doing stuff. But man, they destroy. The only thing that gets its ass kicked worse than Kong is Hong Kong.
Oh God, Hong Kong gets absolutely
destroy.
Demolished.
King Kong Hong. If your last name is Kong, you are not coming out of this movie in any kind of good shape.
I love what Chris Steckman said though, because he made a really good point that they have this whole thing that they've set up through all the MonsterVerse movies, which is like this Hollow Earth theory, where it's like that kind of like explain and then completely abandon because it's like, oh, it's a wormhole. No, it doesn't matter. They can climb out of it.
Yeah.
It,
Yeah.
it makes absolutely zero sense. But there's a great kind of visual where it's like the upside down, where there's a world on the ceiling and there's a world on the floor and there's a zero gravity thing in between. Why the fuck couldn't they not have had Godzilla and Kong fight?
Which I assumed was where they were going with it. Yeah, I assumed that's where they
like,
were going.
That would have been in the
Plus,
coolest
you
shit ever.
don't
watching fucking two monsters that has zero gravity.
Well, and I think that's part of the thing that's inherent in these monster movies that I don't know if it's this is what the audience is clamoring for, but one of the reasons why I like Kong more is Kong's not about destroying cities. Kong is always just like, it's usually his turf. And then even, when he comes to New York and he's on the Empire State Building, it's more about him just getting, he's not destroying stuff. Godzilla is about destruction of cities. That's his, that's the classic of just stomping around on these buildings, which I don't have. It's why I zoned out of Man of Steel and I zone out of a lot of like action things when it's just too much. The destruction becomes noise. And I'm just like, I can't. It's too much to even do versus like I would have absolutely loved to watch them duke it out in this weird fucking netherworld that's got all these crazy gravity things where I'm like, I'm the guy watching like a building get leveled and I'm like, ugh. Like I don't, and that's a stupid thing to go in and be like worried about loss of life when watching a Godzilla movie, but it's like at some point, I keep being like, there's people in those buildings.
You have like Kevin Smith. They're contractors on the new Death Star.
There's something about just knowing like the massive amount of deaths. Even when Godzilla destroys Pensacola, which give him that. That's the one really positive thing he did do in the movie. It's just like, I don't know. I get such a fatigue
like, what's wrong with
from
Godzilla?
it.
He's attacking people. We're like, no, this city needs to be wiped off the map.
I mean, when he first got there and just destroyed Pensacola, and everyone's like, "Why did he do this?" I'm like, why? Really? You have to ask yourself that. I could give you 30 reasons why he would do it. None of them were what the reason was in the movie, but it's interesting. Like I very much recognize it's not my genre, and you hit it right on the head. Like I would have much rather seen that fight in, I keep calling it Middle Earth, Hollow Earth. Like that would have been amazing and probably cheaper because everything is just in computer and completely. I mean, you could do it in. You could probably if you gave Favreau and Filoni 2 action figures, they could have recreated that entire thing in Hollow Earth in like a weekend and like done it Mandalorian styled in the void or whatever they call their the don't, what the hell is that called? That they shoot the Mandalorian in.
I mean, you're the one who told me.
Yeah, I think it's like the Void or something. It's something strange like that.
I think the Void is like that's Sci-Fi Channel.
It might. Yeah, this is true. Well, speaking of Sci-Fi Channel, we can dive into our topic here, boy, and get to this quick so that Patrick playing the drinking game doesn't die.
No. Actually, I think if it's less than 5 minutes, then it's to finish your beer. So.
It was not less than 5 minutes. Thank God. Oh, Lord Almighty.
Oh God.
I have to be careful of these things now. We have a responsibility. So yeah, we kind of, we had sort of a loose topic planned for tonight, and it's really just because it's becoming such again, I mean, this goes in cycles, and I think there was a large part of this kind of, there's always been a fan culture behind cinema and TV and pop culture, and it's happened for years. And when the internet first gained popularity, it was the first time that fans had other than writing into magazines or showing up at Comic-Cons, it was all of a sudden fans had this voice. And of course it was like they used that voice to just shit on things unmercifully, which was kind of the days of talkback. I mean, we have one of our first episodes, I think, way back. I mean, we've done talkback culture on the first episode we did with Ryan. We also did kind of internet movie reviews on our 3rd episodes. We've covered some of these topics, but it really is becoming, it's hit like a fever pitch now. And one of the biggest things that kind of spurred this, of course, is most recently is what's happening with DC and the Snyder Cut of Justice League, and how that's kind of polarized things. But it's something that stems from other places, really. And I think that's something we can talk about here. Ben, you're a big sports fan, and that's kind of the original, the OG toxic fan base comes a lot out of sports.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And there are some sports teams that foster a more toxic fan base, but it's this idea of loving something so much that you destroy it. Your love is too much. You have too much ownership or entitlement to the thing you love.
Yeah. So I think the thing that in sports, what they like to call it is the armchair quarterbacking.
Yeah.
So it's like you know more than the people who are in the room who are working with these athletes every day. And I think it's actually apropos. I think it's a really interesting point to make with film and with TV nowadays, because fans do have such a more vocal presence, and it's because of Twitter and it's because of these online platforms that allow people to circulate comments and stuff like that just get traction all over the place. Whereas so 20 years ago, you love a TV show's last episode ends, you don't like the way it ends, then you're going to bitch about it to friends around the water cooler, and that's it. Well, now we have a show ends, and not only do we bitch around the water cooler about it, we then boycott the studio and then try to have them recreate something in an image that we think is our own in order to justify a better ending. It just makes absolutely zero sense to me. And honestly, and I've said this before on the podcast, I think it's really dangerous because I think it usurps art. I think it when you put that much power into the fans' hands. So if you rewind a little bit, I mean, for the past 75 years, all studios have ever done is try to preconceive what the audience is going to like. And they
focus group it. Yeah.
And they've made movies based on that model. To sometimes basically dangerous results. I mean, it's that they've never really been right. And I'm sure that there are some instances where, hey, maybe they, made changes to a movie that would have been better. But for the most part, studios aren't on the side of the artist. And all that's happening now is basically like we have a fan culture that's kind of like piling on top of studio people about like, this is what could have made this better.
Yeah,
and I think that sucks.
Yeah, I mean, and it's also just it's that idea of ownership, and it's that idea of I had this preconceived notion, and my notion is better than your notion is better than their notion that's better than whomever's.
Yeah,
and I think we can kind of take a step back because I don't want to focus only on toxic fan culture, although that they are the most vocal.
Yeah,
but some of these things started off positively, and it's interesting to look at. TV shows, especially TV shows that have been saved by fan campaigns of saying like, hey, the show is getting canceled. We really want it. Things like getting a Firefly movie after Firefly is canceled. There's some great ones. Fringe fans mailed in red vine licorice to the Fox Entertainment president and got 2.5 more seasons of that show. Reaper fans sent in socks and got another season of Reaper. Jericho, one of the first ones, people sent hundreds of thousands of pounds of peanuts to the studio because it was a throwaway line in the episode. Now these are, by the way, not some of these shows are not even that amazing of shows, but the fans were passionate about them, and they said, okay, how can we make our voice heard? But it was in a positive way. And I think, and what's kind of interesting that I want to bring into this as well as the sports side of it, is we can also apply this to politics as far as fan bases go, and the idea of what are you? I know that's a drinking game right there, but if you talk about toxic fan bases, that exists as well on both sides. This is definitely a bipartisan thing where you've got Bernie bros and you've got Trump supporters, and both of those are a lot of times toxic communities that are trying to use their voice to varying degrees and kind of like, well, this thing worked for this other group. What if we are like, let's take it to the next level? And I think there is a fine line between sending peanuts to the studio and casting death threats against a studio head because they did something you didn't like with the property.
Absolutely. I think you have to, I mean, yeah, there's a huge differentiation between those, but all I was trying to make a point of is that fan culture has changed in that, for better or worse, now fans are probably being heard more than they ever have before. And I think that it's changing the way that movies and television is made. And like I said, for better or for worse.
Well, so I have a question for you. So I agree. I think obviously the loudest voice are the people that are both the fans and the detractors, the people that dislike or love something. But
and what I would say is, what would qualify is that sometimes the loudest voices aren't necessarily the worst voices. In politics, usually the loudest voices are the worst voices. But in filmmaking and television and fan reaction, sometimes the loudest voices are voices of reason. I mean, sometimes there are people who really can come in with a objective, ideology and say, this is the way I imagine things or I see things. And usually, and I would say the best online personalities, if you're talking about like my favorite people, like the Chris Tuckmans of the world, or like they come in with a pretty broad view and they allow all sorts of perspectives to kind of permeate that. It's the toxic fandom is more of a Reddit kind of like a weird, it's like a byproduct of just enthusiasm of properties.
And it's a protectiveness over
exactly.
Really, that I keep coming back to the word, but there's this the idea of ownership and entitlement to these things, that I've supported this thing, therefore I should have a say, or I should be more instrumental in where it's going. And I think some of that is tied to what you were talking about before, because this has been happening, but in a different way. So you talk about studios trying to make things they think are going to appeal to the widest audience. A lot of that is done through test screenings, and test screenings can drastically change an artist's intention or idea. And sometimes it's done for great effect. Like, I love the Farrelly brothers were known very much in the 90s for test screening countless times just to get joke beats correct. And I remember the one I love hearing about the most is in There's Something About Mary. They have the scene where he zips his dick and balls into his zipper, and they edited that scene something like 15 different ways and tested each of them of like, when do we show the balls? Like, at what point does it have the best reaction from the audience? Where is it and they legitimately crafted that scene around like, here's the sweet spot. Like, if we wait just this long, like, this is where it's like, it's a huge reaction, versus we show it in this other spot and it's like, it falls dead. No,
I love how the internet just cut out for a second. So you were just like, when do we show his balls? And, just freeze. And there was like 10 seconds of just complete silence.
Yeah, I don't know what's going. The last two episodes are my internet's been a little bit janky. So you may what's unfortunate is that
have you moved to LA?
Yeah. No, well, what's funny is that it doesn't affect me. It affects because I'm going live into our soundboard to get technical with all of you out there. But Ben is coming in through Zoom. So what happens is Ben freezes for 5 seconds, and then it starts talking, and it sounds like he's really excited about whatever the new thing that is coming out of his mouth.
So I come really fast.
Yes, the second biggest release of the year is Ben Wilson coming too fast. But yeah,
behind Kong.
So it's kind of interesting, and I think fans also probably sense that idea of like, okay, studios have been pandering to the widest audience for so long. We should have more of a voice. That we don't like this idea of a studio going out to everybody. Like, we don't want a Star Wars that makes the most money. We want the Star Wars that makes us happy. But that's so myopic, because everybody's different. Like, so you and I have very similar tastes. And I know when we look at the newest Star Wars movies, my favorite of the new one is easily not your favorite, which is, I think Rogue One is my favorite of any of the new Star Wars that that's come out. I know, and that's not your favorite. And that's just a difference of that style and that story is to me.
Difference of educated opinion and people who are willing to talk about it. Yes.
I thought you were just slamming me that I don't have the educated opinion.
No. I'm saying both of us have the educated opinion.
And it's very interesting because we of course are going to talk about Game of Thrones and what happened with that show as well. But there is this idea of like I could do this better and I can fix this and I can do this and this wasn't how I thought it was going to happen or what I expected. And yes, sometimes there are very valid criticisms in those things. There are plenty of things that we can look at. Same as you mentioned great ways, the armchair quarterback. Sometimes the armchair quarterback is right, but they also have the benefit of hindsight, of no pressure. They're just sitting there thinking of things, and that's very different than actually being on a set and shooting
the
something.
Armchair quarterback is usually doing 12-ounce curls and is, sitting there watching a play unfold and being like, should have thrown to the fucking, running back. He was cutting across the middle, whatever. I'm like, you're not out there with like fucking people flying at you. They're 350 pounds.
Sure.
Like you don't understand the game.
Well, and there's also, and the part that's so disheartening for me out of all of this, if it was just people bitching about shit, and that's how it used to be. I mean, that was a lot of the late 2000, like 2007 and 2013 or so, that era. It's just a lot of people just being annoying, right? And the toxic kind of fan culture mostly represented itself that way, of just people whining and ranting and the stuff. And then there was this shift starts to happen where people start just like targeting human beings. And human beings because the character they played didn't do the thing that they thought it should do, or the person made this thing that didn't do the thing they thought they wanted it to. And that's the worst of it for me.
I feel like Jar Jar Binks started all of this. I mean, because there was a huge fan backlash against Phantom Menace when it first came out.
Yes.
But Jar Jar was unnecessarily targeted as being like, this is the reason why this movie sucks, which is, I don't think is accurate at all.
No,
but it was really strange because like Ahmad Best got like fucking death threats, and like
Jake Lloyd got death threats.
I mean, just weird shit. And I think that was the beginning of sort of the toxic fandom, which is, ironically, of course, it's Star Wars, because Star Wars is, I think, the most vitriolic fan base ever in the history of. I mean, that they're worse than like the worst Marvel nerds.
No, and what's really interesting about Star Wars, and Marvel is could probably be a successor to it in terms of this, but the thing with Star Wars that's so funny is it's always been viewed as this geeky thing, but it's not just a fucking geeky thing.
No,
everybody, you're in high school and your jocks, they fucking watch Star Wars, and they've watched, and some of them are probably nerdy about it, and the nerds watch it, and your parents watch it. Like it's something that transcends nerddom, and that becomes, I think that's what happens with that toxic side of things, is that there are so many people, and I think you nail it. I think that is the birth, the Phantom Menace in 99 that like that summer, and it's also because it was this huge, everyone just waiting to see this movie and this thing that was going to be the biggest thing ever, and the internet's just in its early stages, but people are like, oh, we can get set photos from, like, so it was one of the few times that you used to be able to get like a behind the scenes shot in a Starlog or an Entertainment Weekly, but this was like
Cinescape for me.
Yeah, exactly. And now you're getting like set reports, and people are like, I saw that they're doing this, and there's going to be a completely CGI character in it, and there's all of like, so everyone just had this expectation. And then you go to the movie, and I think what happens with it, with kind of where the fans go, is that this is where it feels the most like politics to me, because sports, people are more than happy to throw their team under the bus or their coach or their quarterback. But there's what happens with Star Wars is you go to see Star Wars and everyone comes out and everyone probably agrees that it's okay. It wasn't the worst thing in the world. It wasn't the best thing in the world. But the people that want to be fans want to protect it and defend it and be like, no, it's fucking great. And the ones that want to shit. So half of them are like, Jar Jar's the worst thing that's ever happened in Star Wars. In other words, like, that's the best lightsaber that's ever happened in Star Wars. And they're both parts of right. And I think that's where that makes such a perfect storm in the middle.
Side part, which is really funny. Have you heard about the whole Aaron Rodgers Jeopardy thing?
Yes, of course. I was literally just going to bring that up.
so I asked. I was like, yeah. Apparently, he's doing it for 2 weeks. He says he wants to do that after he retires. Like that's his like dream gig, is he wants to do Jeopardy. And Beth goes, "Is he smart?"
He did very well on Celebrity Jeopardy.
I was like, well, yeah.
Yeah.
Ace the Wonderlick. He's got like a 15, 16.
Well, you saw what the guy
SAT.
did on the first episode he hosted, right? With the bet.
No.
So the guy doesn't know the answer to Final Jeopardy. So instead of his answer, he goes, whose idea was it to kick? Was it a good idea to kick that field goal? Which was the very tumultuous end of the. And Rogers is like halfway through reading it, and he just goes and just starts laughing, which I give him credit for, because like you could see him legitimately be tickled by that question. But it was a wonderful combination of sports and smarts just converging on one area. That's where I thought you were going to mention that. But yeah, it's kind of amazing.
No, I have not seen that, but I just liked. I like Beth's question of
Yes.
Is he smart?
Like, is he like me?
I'm like, well, he's probably a lot smarter than me, and definitely more handsome.
That is right. But yeah, it is. Star Wars is always and has been the oldest, probably toxic fan community, and will continue probably. Although, what is also amazing to watch with a lot of properties is occasionally somebody makes something that makes a lot of the fans happy all at once, which is something like The Mandalorian comes along and kind of everybody, both sides are like, that's pretty fucking good. Like, there's not as much disagreement, but that's hard to do.
Yeah, it's the pre-COVID Ron DeSantis.
Exactly.
Everyone was like, this guy's not that bad.
Ooh. Yeah, it's, it is interesting, but yeah, and I think, we can talk a little bit about Game of Thrones. And as we've said, also, it really, a lot of it is this expectation idea of, Phantom Menace is that great example of everyone has this idea of what this movie is going to be in their heads at that point. And then it happens. And some of the things in that movie align with some of the things that the people want to see or thought they were going to see or are happy to see.
Well, so it's interesting that you brought up Game of Thrones, because Game of Thrones, I feel like, is an interesting aberration from, so I read the Game of Thrones books. Sorry, guys. Yeah, I'm a nerd. I read the Game of Thrones books. But I obviously knew the property well before it was made. And when that show started, it was on a very small budget. It was not, none of those actors were well-known stars, basically. The show grew organically as it gained popularity. And so I felt like that was kind of like a low risk move on HBO's part to make that show. And the toxic fandom just kind of grew as every season got bigger and bigger and bigger, where it's like, oh no, now we own this show. Like this has to deliver to our expectations. And I would just say, like, and I've talked about it in the podcast before, I feel like there's some danger in taking artistic liberties of saying, like, oh, the fans are right, like, do this, this way, as opposed to doing it,
Yeah. Well, and I think there's also the idea of fans like this kind of, to liken it to the politics again. It's this all or nothing kind of view of things. And I know for me, I probably caused undue stress in my life for many years by getting too one way or another about stuff I watch or entertainment I consume. And
Oh, you mean Mamelito?
I might have, yes, back in a time and be like, this is the worst thing ever. So a really good example is when we
just so you understand the reference. So
Yeah.
we have a great friend of the podcast, Paul Mamelito, who's
you've heard him cry at least 3 times on the podcast.
Yes, he's a frequent guest if you're a normal listener. But he was the best man at my wedding. He's a great friend. We love him to death. But he has the I would say gift and the taint of hyperbole.
The taint of hyperbole
I just froze
is
on
Paul.
laughing.
That's Paul's Harry Potter book. It's Paul Mamelino and the taint of hyperbole.
The gift and the taint of hyperbole. Where he would call us after he saw a movie and just be like, "This is the worst movie ever made." And I'm just like, "No, it's definitely not."
It's usually,
First
and
off-
a lot of times it's also, there's always this, can we all agree? Like, it's one of those that's
yeah,
instantly
yeah.
done. And I love that happened during the final season of Game of Thrones in both directions. The episode with the Night King being defeated, Paul called me and was like, "Can we not agree that is the greatest episode
That's
of
the greatest
television that's
episode of
ever
television
been?"
of all time.
And then the finale is like, "Can we all agree that's the worst episode of television?" And I'm like, first of all, no, we cannot all agree on either of those opinions. The idea we can't all agree on anything, but I think there's like, I come to it more and more because I don't know why I'm getting less cynical and jaded as I get older, but I'm more looking
both, man.
I more look at entertainment that's made for us with the idea of what do I think their actual intent was? And I do not believe most people set out to make something shitty just to make money. Like I don't feel that everyone involved in a production just fucking
I'm really
cash
happy that
grabs.
Nick isn't on this podcast because
Yeah.
Nick would.
I
yeah,
mean-
it would turn to a 4-hour.
So that was our discussion at the beginning of this podcast and last night talking about Kong versus Godzilla, which is like, I recognize that movie's not made for me. I think there are things in that movie I enjoy. Is it a thing I'm going to revisit? No. Do I think it was bad? And then in my head to go, what the fuck does bad mean? What does it say? Like, this is a bad movie. Okay, yes, there are things that we can say are bad or whatever, but I'm also just like, fucking people. It's weird. I don't know if it's the COVID thing. People did that thing.
Godzilla take his face off.
I mean, okay, that's an amazing movie. What movie did you shit on the other night that I got upset? Oh, Armageddon. Yeah, I will fight you to the ends of the earth about how much I love Armageddon. But no,
You're allowed to like Armageddon because it's subjective.
I'm allowed.
It's the worst screenplay of
It's
of
true.
all time.
No,
it makes no sense.
So it's funny. Like yes, we can nitpick things and critique things, and that's great. But ultimately, a lot of the stuff I'm kind of like, did someone try to do something to an effect, and maybe it falls short, and maybe it doesn't. That's not. I don't take the ownership over like I'm gonna this is bad. Or this is there are things I love, there are things I don't love as much, and there are things I'm like, I'm not gonna watch it again. But like, what was it? I lost an hour and a half of my life. Like, big deal. It's not the end of the world. And I think the Game of Thrones was. That's the other side of it is to also, especially when you come to TV,
It's not the world's end.
no, and
Right,
it's like also this idea of Game of Thrones had what seven seasons, and for easily 6 of those 7 or 5 of those 7 seasons, everyone was fucking on board with that show and loves parts of that show, and I hate that because they didn't like the end of it. Now all of a sudden the whole show is shitty. Like that I don't get.
And that's the contention I get with Nick is that I'm like, when somebody can easily explain and be like, well, they fucked up every character, or they did this, they did that, or whatever. I'm just like, then make your own fucking show. Like, you don't have the capability. You don't have like it's kind of a bad place to come from. But yeah, just if your ideas are that much better, then make them.
Yeah, or I mean, or don't you don't have to put your money behind. You don't have to go see this thing, or you don't have to follow those people to other properties. And
then stop being a fan.
Yeah,
like don't complain about somebody. What I mean, because here's the thing: is like I'm not even gonna go into Benioff and Weiss or like whoever was writing or directing or doing everything. Like, just imagine the fucking key grip on the last season of Game of Thrones. That person's fucking working their ass off every day. And they come back and look on like Ain't It Cool News or like whatever it is. And it's just like, yeah,
like, this is garbage. And they're like, well, shit, that was like my last 10 years of my life.
This is the worst fucking thing I've ever seen in my fucking life. And it's just like, I mean, that's so, terrible for somebody like that to
well, and I think that's part of when we talk about toxic fans, and again, this is a lot of this mirrors sports a ton. Is there and politics? There seems to be a subset of people that are happier being upset with things, and that's something that they can control. Is to say like I disagree with this. I could do better. This is terrible. Versus just loving things. And now that can go too far. And DC is a good example of kind of what happened with that, with the Snyder cut. Let's get into that a little bit. Because it's interesting. If the whole thing with Snyder happened similarly with the Marvel Netflix shows. So let's say that, Netflix canceled and Disney shut down the Marvel stuff. And let's say the Marvel fans go fucking crazy like the DC fans and do whatever and get Marvel to be like, okay, well, we're gonna fire back up Daredevil, or we're gonna fire back up Luke Cage or Jessica Jones. There would be this idea of like a victory, like we won, we did it, we spoke our voice, and we loved this thing, and we loved it enough that we gave it life again. And so I get that side of the people that were really into the Snyder things, and I agree that the movie is much better than what we saw in the theaters. Is it exponentially better in my opinion? No. But it is definitely better. And I get the idea that especially for people that were excited about that universe, it's a big deal. And I can imagine that was like, especially seeing that the whole epilogue on that, which is all they're probably ever going to get of what Snyder was going to do with the next two movies. I get that. That's you watching Lord of the Rings extended cuts and getting like 10 to 12 hours of Lord of the Rings, which I tried to do that once and I got maybe a quarter of the way through Two Towers where I was like, I can't, that's too much. It's not. Versus for me, if they did that for Harry Potter, or they did that for Endgame or Infinity War and gave me a 7-hour, 8-hour version, yes, of course I'm going to watch that. And of course I'm going to fucking fawn about it and be excited about it. So I empathize, and I like part of kind of what happened with the DC thing, but there has to be it's sending thing. It's creating a march versus storming the Capitol. I think that's where you come down to what is positive fandom and what is negative fandom. There are ways. They're harder. They're harder to do because they're not as loud and they're not as noisy and they're maybe not as effective even.
Are they better, faster,
stronger? But yeah, I think that's what is, because I differ with you a little bit, and I understand, especially because you have also created more art in your life than I have. So I it's hard for me to understand that kind of ownership and that side of it. But I like
don't discredit yourself, Matt. You made Roadhouse the musical.
I did make Roadhouse the musical with a lot of
achievement among all people that are associated with this podcast. I think
I did focus group that heavily. I should say I focus group that very heavily. But no, I think it is interesting because I know that you have a very real fear of how much voice or ability to change art that public has. And it's kind of funny because filmmakers are also guilty of this themselves. To bring it back to Star Wars, George Lucas has changed all kinds of things he's done in his movies because he doesn't agree with how he did it originally, or he couldn't accomplish it the way he did originally, which is kind of crazy as well. So it's tough because you don't deal with this in other mediums. No one goes and paints over the Mona Lisa because they want her smile to be broader. Like it's kind of crazy. Yeah.
I mean, I would undress her and see those titties.
Mona's Lisa's. That's a weird. This is why Ben's not allowed in the Louvre anymore. But what are you doing, sir? I'm trying to see them titties. Looking down the front of it. Nope. Foiled again.
I'm sorry.
Foiled again. Ben's face is beat red. He has tickled himself so much with this joke, just so you're all aware. Oh my Lord. He is Ray's gone bye-bye.
Ray's gone bye-bye. That's so dumb. It only got me because it was the dumbest thing I've ever said. Oh my God.
We'll focus group this episode and get us somewhere back on the rails. I think what's interesting also is that there are a lot of nerdy cultures and fan cultures that don't seem to have as much issues. So you look at something like Star Trek, and those used to be very warring fandoms, probably still are. Star Trek occupies a different space, though.
Yeah, but they used to war about like what part of that universe was better, and I think it was not vitriolic in any way. It was almost a productive dialogue that came apart. Like, well, here is what Next Generation did, but here's what Deep Space Nine did. Well, here's what Voyager did, and it was like more of a like, what's moving the plot forward better, and like what's using the best story devices. Basically.
And I think that's a really interesting thing to also think of as far as the fandom goes, because we're all Marvel nerds here. But there are a lot of people, the DC fans they're very protective of DC and they don't like Marvel, and they like to talk about Marvel being it's the joke factory and it's not their serious, grounded or introspective, which I could argue that for plenty of hours of thing, but you can listen to our podcast and hear all of our reasons why we probably disagree with that. Right. But I do understand it. I think where it starts to get really interesting is what's happening with streaming right now is we're starting to dilute's the wrong word. We're starting to what's it called with when you diversify. We're diversifying our portfolio.
Saturate?
No, well, saturate. That would be a lot of other people's description of it, but I think we're diversifying the portfolio so that now Marvel's got three. We're gonna have 3 TV series under our belt by the middle of summer, and they're all very different things. And it's spreading some of that heat off of the movie, so that it's not the one movie you get each year is not as much as weighing on that shoulders. And the same with Star Wars. We've got Mandalorian. Now we're gonna have a book 2 of Mandalorian that's a Boba Fett series, and we're gonna have this other thing.
We're gonna have Obi-Wan.
Yeah, and now you can choose, and you can say, okay, so I didn't like the Star Wars saga, the new movies. But there was so much on those, and they had to accomplish so much. And it's like, fuck all of that. Let's just tell individual stories. And what's amazing about that is coming as a result completely of what comic books have done for years. Comic books have runs, and people like certain runs better than other runs. So it's not like
we'll have 4 episodes, basically, or like four. Like, this is a run where we're going to have these crossovers to these superheroes. It's only going to be 4 episodes and then it's over.
Yeah. And that's so you don't have to say, like, I'm a Thor fan or not a Thor fan. You can say, like, I like Taika Waititi's Thor run, but I don't really like Branagh's Thor run. Or some people say they like Thor.
That's the Paul Mammalito.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, I think everyone's going to start. I think we're getting more of this. I think that's the side that's listening to the fans, and thankfully it's working, at least to this point monetarily, that the studios are able to do more of that. So it's not and Marvel did that with pretty good effect on Netflix, because I think those 4 series that they did were very different. And I know, like, I liked Daredevil, but I really liked Jessica Jones season 1. Like, that was
season
something
1 of
different
Jessica
to me.
Jones was really cool.
But that's also super niche. Like, it's not something that everybody really got behind or liked, because it
totally.
wasn't, it had a different voice. And I think that's what I hope where some of this fandom puts its efforts is into stuff like that.
I think the reason why you and I both liked that is because it's a broken character. It's a broken character that's basically like trying to find their way back to being a superhero, which I fucking love. I think that's
it's maybe probably in my top 3 Marvel villains of any of the properties that they've done so far, with Kilgrave.
Yeah. Well, Kilgrave and I mean, obviously when you have David Tennant,
Yeah.
Somebody who's really well known for playing villains, in that role. But yeah, I 100% agree with you. I think that right now, and I think we're at a fever pitch right now when it comes to like fan expectation versus reality. If we, and honestly, it terrifies me. Like just imagining like what happens if the new Ghostbusters movie comes out for just for point of reference, and if the villain isn't up to par, it's just like going to get slaughtered online. I'm like, well, what's the point? After years and years of Jason Reitman, like coming up with this concept and working on it with Gil Keenan and writing something and bringing it back the entire original cast. I'm like, I don't want to live in a world where people are going to shit on the new Ghostbusters movie. I just don't. If people have an adverse opinion based off of a realistic objection to a factual component that actually occurs within the movie, Paul Feig, we're looking at you. Yes, that's fine.
I don't object to that movie, other than it's not
Ghostbusters.
Yeah, it falls short, but it's not. Again, it's not the worst. It doesn't feel like a disgrace to me. And it's funny to also, when we talk about the fandom, that often happens with a cast with it. And I'm glad you brought up Ghostbusters, because I want to get into this, because Bill Murray has a interview floating around this week. I don't know if you've caught any of it or not.
No, I haven't.
It's very interesting, because he talks about, obviously, this new Ghostbusters film that will now be coming out in November, I believe, of this year. That Ivan Reitman's son has been working on for several years to get produced. Now, Bill Murray does not mince words about things he likes and dislikes and whether those opinions are valid or not. But he basically says, after this movie, we will have 4 Ghostbusters films that exist. And he says there are two of those films that are not Ghostbusters to him. One is Feige's, and the other, I'm sorry, Feige's, not Feige. The other is Ghostbusters 2, which he considers to be a slap in the face of what the first movie was, and feels he was conned. He got a pitch for the movie and agreed to it based on the pitch, and then showed up for shooting and with the script, and it was completely different, and he considers that movie not to be Ghostbusters. Now, that's interesting, because that's a person who is one of the Ghostbusters, and who has an opinion on it. And a lot of people love Ghostbusters 2. I think everyone agrees it is not as good as Ghostbusters 1.
I mean, if you think it's better than 1, then there's probably something wrong.
I agree, but I remember as a kid even just kind of being like, this is not nearly as good as the first one. But I have fondness for it now.
But there's some really cool imagery in that one, like the Duncan Steele scene, like where he's on the I mean, like that. I'm like, that's scarier than almost anything in the first scene.
And there are some great lines in it, but it is interesting to have someone who's almost part of the creation. It's amazing to me, and according to Murray, he thinks this new one feels like this is the first time it's felt like I did a sequel to Ghostbusters, which is kind of interesting.
The only thing I heard, and this is maybe hearsay or maybe I saw something through Dark Horizons or something along those lines. But I remember him saying that the shoot was really hard.
Yes, that was part of the same part of a similar interview where they were doing it. He said it was like he was physically like he's like we fucking putting on the packs and getting knocked down and getting back up. He's like it fucking was exhausting. And
Yeah,
he had a great line. He goes, sometimes that is what makes the best.
The
The
best-
idea that
oh,
it was hard to
that's
do
interesting.
makes it a
Okay.
better movie. It's interesting, but that's what's so funny about all of this is because everyone has an opinion. And I'm sure Bill Murray didn't want to do a bad movie or want to, I mean, it's hard for me to wrap my head around this like blanket dismissal of stuff and not just kind of spending more time on that negative side. Like, and we even dealt with this when we were talking about The Stand, which is that like I didn't like certain things in The Stand, but it was more. Eventually, you and I were talking about it and just kind of like, but there were these really good moments in it, and like, why do we? It's a weird human behavior thing to spend more time nitpicking and trying to fix something instead of just being like, hey, what's the shit you really liked, and let's fucking just like celebrate the shit that was really good that we liked in it, instead of just like spending too much time shitting on it.
That's kind of where I land on like the Hobbit movies. Obviously nobody likes them that much.
I would say nobody likes that much is a better qualifier.
yeah. That much. I mean, as compared to Lord of the Rings, but like I'll go back and watch those movies. I'm just like, there's so much fun stuff in there. Like there's some really cool moments. There's some really cool stuff. There's some great performances. Yes, they're not Lord of the Rings. They're what is going to be Lord of the Rings? It's like exactly like what's going to be Star Wars? Like what is going to be The Matrix? What's going to be these next things that are going to be big? And you just have to check yourself and realize like people put their like heart and soul into making something that, whether they're trying to placate an audience or not, they're putting their heart and soul into creating something that is they're putting out there for everybody to enjoy. And the fact that people just can't enjoy it or are unable to enjoy it because of some sort of preconceived notion about like what they have entitled to, or what they're entitled to as fans, it's fucking horseshit. It's a toxic culture.
Well, it's also the idea of trying to convince someone that the thing they like is not good.
It's not good. Yeah.
And the Hobbit's a really great example. So you and I went and watched all 3 of the Hobbit movies on opening night on a Thursday night. It was always right around your birthday. We go to it was not super packed because
it was the only reason why you
it was like we would go at like 10 o'clock and those movies are long. So like we were out late. We go Thursday night, we have a couple of beers at the theater and go in and watch the movies.
Yeah,
and
I like tap and then go.
Yeah, well it was interesting in that the so the first Hobbit movie I was caught off guard because I didn't really get what he was doing, which is that he was making a kids movie. And that's part of what happened with Phantom Menace, I think, as well, is that years before people shat on Jar Jar Binks in the Phantom Menace, we're too young to have really been part of it because we were into it. People were shitting on the Ewoks and Return of the Jedi and how this was a slap in the face to this amazing movie. We're going to finish it with a bunch of fucking bears in costumes and what happened to Han Solo? He's not the badass and cool guy anymore. And like, there are all of these things, even though everyone agrees everything that happens in the arc of Vader and Luke and the Emperor, plus the opening of that movie, there's so many great things to like in Jedi. But I think there's this idea of like, someone can't I can't like the Ewoks. I can't I come out and I'm like, I don't mind the Ewoks. I have no problem with the Ewoks. I think they're funny. I had my Ewok pajamas when I was a kid. I loved it. Wicket was like this like little kid Ewok, and I felt like I had representation in it. Like there's a fat little bear kid in there. That's me. I'm on screen. Like I that's the part I dislike of the toxic stuff the most, because the same is said with DC and Snyderverse. I have no problems with Snyder Cut, and I have no problems with people fucking loving that movie and just talking about how much they like everything that's done in that and how they've handled the character of Superman. They like that it's different from the other stuff, and it does. They take big fucking swings with well-worn characters in that movie, which it's hard to argue. Even if I disagree with them, it's hard to argue with being like, we've had a bunch of Superman, we've had a bunch of Batman. Yeah, we probably should see something different out of these ones to make it interesting. Maybe. Like, I don't mind that big swing. And the Hobbit movies were the same. And I love that the second Hobbit movie, with Desolation of Smaug. I think is fucking great. I think the last act of that movie is amazing. I think him flying and getting ready to lay siege on whatever, I don't even remember what the town is, where Stephen Colbert lives. Like, I love all of
Lake
that
Town.
Shit. Yeah, like, how can, and in my head I'm like, how can you
And the
not
last line of the
like
movie
that?
is him saying, "What have we done?"
Yeah, and well, and
And
before it
Professor
is like,
Black.
I am. What is Smaug has a great. He's like, I am death. I am.
He says, "I am death." Yeah.
It's fucking. I mean, the end of that movie is baller, and I think we have to. I think it is better for film and for filmmakers, for people to celebrate the things they like, instead of telling them everything they've done wrong. Reward them with positive reinforcement of the shit that they got right or the things that you liked, so that you get more of that. Because no filmmaker is told this sucks and they make something great as a result of that. Like, it's very rare. Lindelof might be one of the few people to be like, okay, I fucked up something, I'm going to go learn from that. I think learning is great, but it's like, but Lindelof also learned what shit people liked about Lost and turned that into Leftovers. And I think the people in WandaVision learned what things people like about Lost. And
I think that Nick would argue that, well, never mind.
No, I think I want filmmakers to learn positive reinforcement stuff, because I think that's really of learning more of what to do, a little bit of what not to do. Because I just think that makes better entertainment, and I think we are seeing that. I hope that continues on that path. I think streaming is a big part of that, because you're also getting smaller voices with big ideas in streaming that are able to kind of do things they might not have the opportunity to elsewhere.
Yeah, well, I think, I mean, we've talked about it in past podcasts, but I think it's the interesting thing is that, especially with the ubiquity of streaming content now, is that before, like if we're talking 30 years ago, you have a director that has made 2 independent films that were both pretty well received, and now you give him a $40 million budget and you put him on a studio movie. That was seen as a higher risk. Well, nowadays that's standard operating procedure, man. It's just like, no, we are going to mine talent and we're going to give them a budget and we're going to put them on a platform where we're not going to lose money. And it's kind of brilliant. But it's also super productive because you have these small upstart filmmakers that have ideas and they're able to find a platform to be able to release these movies that they have in their head or whatever. And so I think it's kind of a win-win for pretty much everybody.
Well, and I think also with a lot of people probably don't think about the process a lot, and I don't know the process in and out very, very well. I know some about it. I like the idea that there are constant pitches happening for existing properties. All right now, there are people pitching Marvel all kinds of different things. They're pitching existing characters with different plot lines or ideas for a series or for a film. They're pitching characters that have not yet been brought to screen in one way or another. They are pitching characters that were brought to screen before, and that is happening in a constant cycle. So that's what's kind of interesting to think about when we want to blanketly dismiss something, is that by the time it gets to a screen for our beady little eyes to consume, it has gone through countless starts and stops and ideas and different people's input and thought process and all of these things. And yes, there are people that are higher up and have more control over what's going on that, but it all comes down to like, what is the WandaVision pitch? Like, I'd love to be in a room where they're like, we're going to take these two different kind of comic book threads and we're going to throw it into this, and we want it to be a love letter to TV. And somebody in that room is like, fuck, that sounds awesome. And they know also that not everyone like, and there, I'm sure there's a conversation after that where they got to get the money up. And someone
know
like,
that
yeah.
a lot of your audience has no idea what I Love Lucy is. Yeah, of course.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, when your newest TV show you're referencing is Malcolm in the Middle, and that show is 20 years old, you're taking a huge risk to assume that people are going to stick with you for 3 episodes before you get to anything that even approaches looking like a classic Marvel movie that people have been lining up for. So I think that's where, because like that's a really interesting imagine. So let's imagine a terrible, terrible world right now. The terrible world is that we get snippets of things, and then we have to vote on. It's a choose your own adventure world, right? So we get 1 episode of WandaVision. And we have a group of a room of us, and we have 1 episode, and people are like, what do you want to see next? And some are like, well, I don't know what the fuck that was, so I don't want to see any more of this sitcom bullshit. And the other one's like, no, I want to watch more sitcom stuff. And now we have this committee that's sitting there and arguing about which way does this go next. The same as of a movie. You watch the first act, and now people get to decide where does this go, what it is doing. And I think that's where you talk about that we don't want that world. We want people to be able to feel confident in executing the vision that they have. I think that's where this toxic fandom is dangerous, is because as soon as the makers of these things have too much of that in their head of like, okay, what are people going to say after this first episode? Like, are they going to stick on this ride with us versus just being like, no, fuck it. This is what I think. This is my story. This is what I think is going to entertain people. And people are free to disagree on that. Like, should they have done less TV shows in WandaVision? Maybe.
And not to bring it back to Lindelof, just because I know we were talking about him earlier, but one of the things I love about The Leftovers is that I feel like he had no expectations of like what people were gonna like. That feels like a fully artistic vision with no preconception of like what the audience is gonna think or feel. And that's why it's so good. That's why it's so good. It feels like a fully artistic vision that's made outside of the spectrum of fan reaction.
He's still learned. It's still clear that he has brought that baggage with him into positive effect. But yeah, I agree that show feels like he set out. It did everything he wanted it to do, no more, no less. That was his vision.
Yeah, to me, it was like, I don't care if you're gonna like this or not. It's just what I'm gonna do.
And to be confident in that enough people will like it that this will work.
It's gonna be okay. Yeah. And I think that's the reason why that show works so well for me, is because, and of course, we talk about Damon Lindelof all the time. Drink. Where's the air horn on that one? But no, I think that my problem with Damon Lindelof often has to do with like what he's trying to do to meet fan expectations. Like Prometheus is like trying to make an alien movie. I'm just like, no, just fucking stop. Like, you're a gifted writer. Do the Leftovers. I don't think that they had any idea that they were going to make another season or 2 or season 2 or 3 on that. I think it was just made because Tom Perrotta wrote a really interesting book, and it was a really interesting take.
And all that first season is for the most part, it's that book. And then season 2 and 3 just are feel like almost they're not different shows. It does actually all stitch together very nicely, but it is a little jarring because it goes in. There are definite themes in each of those seasons that are separate from the ones before it, and I think that
there's an episode in season 3 that's a straight up French New Wave movie.
Yeah.
And it's basically just like this surrealist French New Wave film, and I'm just like, I'm totally on board at this point. Like I'm totally.
And of course there are people that probably hate that episode, just like there are people that hate certain episodes of Breaking Bad, despite the show being, universally acclaimed. But I think that's
so Beth hates Fly.
I was just going to bring up Fly,
which I think is one of the greatest episodes of television I've ever seen in my entire life.
And
I remember when we watched it, she was just like, I didn't like it. And I was like, why didn't you like it? She was like, I didn't like the way it made me feel. I was like, so it was successful.
But
it was supposed to make you.
But that's also totally okay. But like, it's also okay for her just not to, not respond to it.
Of course,
and
of course.
I think that's kind of the thesis for this thing is also like the fans are also not always right, despite how loud they are. Because like, I love that now everyone just talks about like Michael Keaton as this great Batman when that was such a controversial. And that's the first time I remember hearing fan feedback before something was released and people just being like, fucking Beetlejuice, fucking Mr. Mom is going to be Batman. And like this anger about that. And then Heath Ledger as the Joker, which like now who doesn't think that Heath Ledger delivers one of the best villain performances or superhero movie performances, one of the only ones to win an Oscar for it, posthumously or not. I think he would have won that trophy. Like, I think it was an iconic fucking role. And what if the fans got their way with those? Like, what if the fans were successful in shitting on something enough before those movies came out that we missed out on a Heath Ledger Joker?
If we had Nick Sankrocci's way, then Mark Wahlberg would.
Mark Wahlberg, you cut out for a second. I missed what you just said.
Oh, I just said that Mark Wahlberg would never be employed again.
Oh, well, I don't think that's like the biggest loss, but I get what you're saying, but I don't know that that's a good example. I don't know that my world would collapse if I didn't have another Mark Wahlberg movie, but it is very interesting.
I mean, I do like I Heart Huckabees, to be fair. So,
I listen. I love Three Kings, and I don't want to lose Three Kings, and that's got
really anything by David O. Russell.
Yeah. Really the only good work he does. No, I think that's a really important thing for fans to consider, that we are not always right, despite us thinking that we're right or that we have the better idea or that we could do it better. We sometimes have to trust in the professionals and they're going to get it wrong too, just like sometimes we would get it wrong. It just doesn't always work.
Yeah, I mean, oftentimes I think that we kind of like conflagate our own problems and we kind of throw them up on screen. We have these issues that we then redirect to like our popular media, and I'm just like, think more about in all of these cases, think more about yourself. Like, think more internally. Like, what is it that's causing you to dislike this so much? Well, like if there's something that's going to ruin your day that's in pop culture because a person was cast or you feel like was miscast, or if a certain scene didn't play out the way that you felt like it should, there's likely probably a bigger issue that's going on with you.
Well, if we want to talk psychologically about it, I think it comes down to that idea of control. And things we don't like, we feel like we have control over changing the outcome. So that things that we love, we don't have control. We just love that thing, and it's great that thing happened and they did this amazing thing and we like it. But that doesn't scratch that itch for us of having a voice or having done something, versus saying like, oh, they did that wrong and I recognize they did that wrong. Now I know more than them. I am therefore superior in it. And I think that's a real danger. And it's also just it sucks to view things like that That and I've spent a long time doing that with things. Like I don't particularly love Avatar, and there are people that absolutely love Avatar and love going to the theme park and seeing that world brought to life, and there are more movies for them to watch for it. And for a long time I was like, fuck that shit, like fuck. And then I'm like, why does it matter? Why the fuck does it matter to me that people love? Obviously a lot more people love Avatar than dislike it. It's the highest grossing movie in the entire world again, back on top, and it's spawning 5 movies, and it has a theme park attraction. Like, it's awesome. Like, if you love Avatar, own that. Like, there's no reason for me to dismiss it in any way. It's not like he didn't spend fucking time on that movie and sit and go fucking getting his little boats underwater and figure out how the Avatar world was going to look.
I think this is a good closing bit, but I told you about my experience on that ride, right?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, so I went to Animal Kingdom to do the Avatar thing, which is honestly, it's very cool. Like, I mean, the whole build out is very.
Did you plug one of their things into your butthole? Their little USB things from the dragons?
No, I didn't plug anything in my butthole,
Okay.
but I did happen to ride the ride with my mother-in-law, who is a huge fan of Avatar. Let's just say that she was overexcited on the ride, and that we were catching glances from everybody else in the room who was on the ride as well. It was extremely funny, just because when you're riding next to your mother-in-law, when she's like side straddling a beast and she's screaming like, "This is exactly what I needed." I was like, oh shit, I don't know her. I'm not with her.
Oh man, I really wish I had the soundbite right now from Bad Santa where John Ritter is describing what he saw in the big and tall the plus size dress room, and he's like, "Yeah, oh yeah, you ain't gonna shit right till next week."
Yeah, that would have been actually pretty apropos. That would have been similar to what I heard. And I'm like looking at the guy next to me, like, and the thing is, it's supposed to be super immersive, and you're like wearing 3D goggles, and you're like, flying through these 3D environments. And I look to the guy to the right of me, because my mother-in-law's to the left of me, and he just looks up, and he's just like, "What the fuck is going on?"
You should have been like, "It's okay, that's my mother-in-law." That guy would have bought you a beer. That guy would have bought you a full-priced theme park alcoholic drink if you'd been like, "You're telling me that's my fucking mother-in-law."
By the way, the Avatar theme park beers made by Terrapin.
Yeah, I had one of those. It's very nice, very tasty.
Yeah, very tasty.
I think that is the crux of this is who are we to tell anyone that they're not right to fucking love like Avatar that much?
No, of course. Like love Avatar.
That's their shit. And the same as like, I'm gonna like Marvel. I'm a Marvel fanboy. It's easy at this point. It's comforting to have these worlds constantly just do shit that I find interesting. Are they all equally amazing? No. Are they all super entertaining to me? Yeah. Am I going to keep lining up for them? 100%. And there are people at DC that have very valid criticisms of every one of these things that I like. Anyone can fuck your world up about something you love. There are, no matter what if your favorite movie is Back to the Future or Goonies or whatever, there's someone out there that can fucking ruin that movie for you if you let them. So that's the New Way podcast advice to you. Don't let people ruin shit that you love, and don't ruin it for yourself either. Fucking focus on, there's plenty of shit in the world that is terrible. Don't add to it with being a toxic fan base. That's the advice Uncle Matt's giving you.
I think that's sage advice, Uncle Matt.
That's right.
And I think I heard Beth laughing in the other room while I was telling the Avatar story.
Beth was not on the ride with you?
No,
Yeah.
She was not on the right.
She knew.
No, she knew afterwards.
No, I mean, she knew it was going to happen.
She had no idea.
All right, man. Well, I think that'll do it for our somewhat positive spin on toxic fan bases. Hopefully you got something out of it. We've got lots of good episodes coming up soon, including a new fun pitch game that we talked about on our drinking podcast, and some more one-off small episodes for you. So we're gonna keep trying weekly to get these out there, but we may have a break here or there as we get a little bit further into the summer months. So thank you so much for listening to the New Wave Podcast, and we'll talk to you next time.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Drink.